John Letts is the father of Jack Letts, a British-Canadian man being held in Syria and accused of being an ISIS fighter. He's been nicknamed Jihadi Jack by the British media. And Dr. Alexandra Bain is the director of Families Against Violent Extremism. She's a professor of religious studies at St. Thomas University in New Brunswick. Good to see you both. Thanks for coming in to speak with me about your efforts to try and get some movement here from the Canadian government to bring these Canadians, and some of them families and children, held by the Kurds back to this country. Alexandra Bain, let me start with you. What obligation do you think the federal government has, and effectively that this country has, in dealing with these Canadians being held in Syria?
I think the Canadian government has the obligation to return its citizens who are being held in detention without any form of legal process, to return them to Canada.
What do we know about these people and what role they may have played in or not inside of ISIS?
Well, that's the problem. We don't really know what these people have done. The Canadian government has not been able to go in and question them or investigate. And so we have a group of people who have various stories about their involvement, ranging from absolutely none to some who will admit, yes, they were in fact members of ISIS. But clearly the children weren't and the babies weren't.
Okay, so some people watching will say, look, they're there for whatever reason. We have no obligation in this country to help people who, in some cases, may have volunteered, may have willingly gone to a country to support a terrorist organization, ISIS. What's the response to those people?
Well, in fact, we do. They remain Canadians, and they are in a situation where they're being detained, and they don't have access to any legal counsel or to any help. The thing is, we don't know which ones of them have actually been involved, and we won't know that until we get them home and they can be properly investigated.
That's a good point. How come we can't know that before we decide whether to bring them home or not?
Because our security people can't go there and investigate them. So we want to bring them back home so that they can be investigated. We don't want Canadians slipping back through the border without the government being aware of that. We would rather they be absolutely aware of these people who are coming home and put them through the proper process of being investigated, and if need be, face justice.
Mr. Letts, your son is one of the people being held.
Yes.
You know that some politicians in this country have described him as a terrorist and suggested that the government should make no effort to bring him back to Canada. What do you want to say about that?
I want to say that, as far as I know, and we've had access to lots of information, intelligence, and we have lots of messages from him, and there's no evidence that I'm aware of that was ever involved with anything like that. If there was, I'd be the first to condemn it. He insists he was never a part of ISIS. He went in and was never involved with violence. It seems to me that the evidence that people are talking about, like the politicians, is based on news reports. We know that a journalist back in early 2016 invented the story of, coined the term Jihadi Jack, and said that he had called us and joined ISIS. It never happened. I mean, the number of false news stories is just incredible.
So why did he go to Syria?
Well, he says I mean, I'd like him to answer the question, but he said he went for religious reasons and to help Syrians. I mean, he was very concerned about what was going on in Syria, wanted to do his bit. He was a very dedicated Muslim. He had just recently started practicing Islam, and he said, it's my duty as a Muslim to help other Muslims. But he very quickly realized that what was going on there was not Islam, as he said. They were abusing it all. I want nothing to do with it. He started working with the religious resistance against ISIS. He actually was in Iraq most of the time, and he only went to Syria when he was injured. And that's, he says, he told us that's when he woke up to what was going on and started hearing stuff and started working with people against ISIS. So I think we have lots of evidence to show our side of this. A lot of that came out after he was in Kurdish hands. So we haven't been able to talk about that. In fact, I haven't been able to defend him and present that evidence in any sort of public venue or forum in Britain because of contempt of court rules.
In fact, you could be in trouble for speaking about this now, is that
That's
right?
exactly it. We're not allowed to talk about anything we know about what Jack did when he was in Syria. Well, we know a fair amount about what he did in Syria and what he didn't do. But I risk being put back in jail if I but that contempt of court doesn't apply in Canada.
Right, and to be clear, you've served, I think, a week in jail already because of your efforts to try and get money to your son so that he could get out of Syria. That was viewed by the British as an attempt to fund terrorism. Which
is ironic, given that the police told us, and we have it in writing, that we were allowed to send money. The first thing we did when Jack, we were getting lots of really horrible messages from him saying, Mom, I've got to get out of here. You know, this is not his time. I want nothing to do with this. They're killing all my friends. I've got to get out. I won't make it otherwise. The only way out is a people smuggler. Please send me equivalent to about 1,800 Canadian dollars to get out. That'll get me out. And the first thing we did was go to the police. We had a working relationship with the police. They said they wanted to help us get him out because there are no charges against him. There's no evidence that he's ever a member of ISIS. They just want to talk to him. So they said in writing that we could send the money. And when we did try, they arrested us.
Okay. What do we know about efforts? I'm hearing sort of conflicting reports about efforts by the Canadian government to make some progress here. Initially, the suggestion is the government was keen to try and help the Canadians. Now, all of a sudden, the government's not so keen. Is that a fair representation?
John actually has more experience with the earlier.
Because it's become a big political story in this country with the opposition party, you know, the Conservatives.
Well, I think
hitting the government over there, saying, "Look, you're sympathizing with these terrorists, trying to don't even consider bringing them back to Canada." And I think there's probably a lot of Canadians who side with that point of view. But what's the actual information you can tell us about the role the federal government's been playing?
There's obviously been two separate sort of initiatives here. Jack, this has been, my son's case has been rumbling on for almost 4 years. Whereas the women and children has come up recently as an issue, and I think our discussions with Global Affairs have been going on for 18 months. So initially, we had a very good response from the Canadian High Commission. It was definitely, we're not going to tolerate Canadians being tortured. We have a duty to take these people out. We don't tolerate this kind of thing. We're going to do everything we can. It went over to Global Affairs, initially very positive. We're going to work with the British government to get him, Canada's role was to get him out of Rojava, the Kurdish area, to a safe third country. And then the British government and the Canadian government were going to work together to get him back. And it was a choice of Canada or Britain. Jack has chosen Canada. He wants to come back to Canada. He's Canadian. And that's how we've left it. But then in the spring, that position seemed to have changed, and they hardened, and the communications started to get less progressive. I think it's because the British government has put a block on it. Putting it simply, it's not just that. Obviously, it's a major.
When you say put a block, said, look, you know, we have some concerns about this guy, and we want you to feel the same way in Canada.
I don't know. I wouldn't say specifically we have concerns about this guy. The British government has a policy: nobody comes back from Syria. Women, children, no one. And they're working obviously with their international partners, and they don't want anyone to come back. And we've had it from very good sources that they said, you know, we're not letting anyone back. And we've had Canadian senior people say that the British have to sign off on this, so we can't bring anyone back. So I have a feeling that's a lot to do with it. But obviously there's a great deal of fear, and I understand that. I mean, I don't want jihadis walking the streets, but I don't think that's what's going to happen here if they do come back.
Alexandra, so
I think part of the fear is the New York Times podcast with that young fellow who says he came back and did all kinds of heinous things while he was in Syria. And you know, the Canadian government, the Canadian people are rightfully upset. How is this happening, that people are coming into Canada and they're not being stopped and they're not being investigated and they're not having to face justice? And that's really why we're doing this, is that we agree and we would like to see that happen. We would like, and the Kurds would very much like, for all of the countries to take back their nationals in bulk, in one movement. And we're trying to offer the Canadian government the opportunity to do just that, to keep Canadians safe by bringing our citizens who have been detained home and evaluating them, assessing them, investigating them.
If that means
putting them in
jail here, then that's okay.
That's what it
means.
means. They're Canadians, and they're, you know, for those people, they're our mess. We need to take responsibility for it and protect Canadians as well as the rest of the world from these people.
Okay. Thanks for your time today. We'll continue to follow the story. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.